Hello, and welcome to Critical Thinking and Psychological Defense. This is Module 1, Foundations of Critical Thinking. This course, which will be a series of lectures and some materials that go with it, and even some exercises if you want to try them, is really taught at the level for first-year college students. So that would be appropriate, but if you're a smart person, you'll be fine. Let's jump right into what we're going to talk about today. And this is the first module, and this is the foundational model for what we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this course, which is 12 modules. It'll probably be about 25 called mini lectures. And it really is designed for self-improvement. So we're going to look at what actually is critical thinking, and to really understand critical thinking, we have to look at human cognitive architecture and metacognition. That sounds like big words to you right now. Don't worry, I'm going to define them later as we go along. You see some definitions right now if you're looking at the screen, but we're going to get a little bit more depth into it. And what we really want to learn is to understand what critical thinking is, because if you don't understand what critical thinking is, you cannot apply it. We want to understand the human cognitive architecture and how that actually human cognitive architecture is used by you on a day-to-day basis. Essentially, every decision you make is part of your human cognitive architecture. And understanding that whole piece, that understanding both the architecture and your metacognitive processes, and we're going to talk about what metacognition is, don't worry, can help you make better decisions. So first, let's look at the definition of critical thinking. Now, this has a lot of big words. So and let me just say these words: conceptualize, apply, analyze, synthesize, evaluate. Okay? And all that is done based on observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, communication. But the bottom line, it's the use of your brain, of your thinking processes to evaluate information to make good decisions. And objectivity is a key piece of this. And again, I've used a lot of pretty good big words, but the reality is that this is designed to help you be a better thinker and to make better decisions. So the key principles of good critical thinking, and trust me, this is oftentimes not the easiest thing in the world to do. The first thing is question assumptions. And that really does mean don't take anything completely at face value. You need an evaluative process. You need to assess what's the quality of the information. Is it relevant? Is it coming from a good source? Even if it's coming from a good source, could that good source have specific biases? Then take that piece of information and look at it from a lot of different perspectives and angles. And from all that, come up with what you think is the most logical conclusion from the information that you know is true and factual, good quality, relevant. Try to come up with a conclusion that's logical based on this, but also acknowledge that even with all that you know and all the alternatives you looked at, that there also are things that you don't know, that there are limitations to what you can use critical thinking for, because do you know everything? Are you omniscient? Probably not. So, understanding that limitation is also a piece of the critical thinking process. And you will see this if you can practice this in real life, but realize also that this takes effort. It does take a lot of effort to do these things. Now, why? Okay, why does this make any difference at all? Well, the first thing is it protects you personally from manipulation. And trust me, I see people being manipulated multiple times every day. They're manipulated by other people, but they're manipulated by the press. They're manipulated by commercials. They're manipulated by things that they hear. Manipulation is all around you. And whether you want protection against it or not, it does protect you against it, especially things that are misleading. It helps you in your personal decision making. Now, are you going to actually do engineering process and sit down and write up a chart and an actual table and figure out the pros and cons of every potential alternative every single time you have to make a decision? No, it would just simply take too long. Some things do require a lot of thought processes and some things don't. But that stepping back and using critical thinking will make for better decisions. You're going to be better at academic success, but really academic success is learning how to solve problems, and your ability to solve problems in everyday day-to-day life is also important. It helps you think for yourself. And trust me, I can right now just look at my screen in social media and find 30 people who really don't actually think for yourself. When you parrot other information, is this something where you're thinking for yourself? Is this something that you agree with, and why do you agree with it? What it does do is it helps you improve your communication with other people, though, and that actually helps your relationships. So critical thinking has a lot of things, a lot of benefits. Now, here's an example, and there's a lot of examples that we have here. We'll talk a lot later on about the breaking news, but let's say 95% of doctors recommend this supplement, or the 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Chewgum's come for their patients who chew gum, whatever. When you hear something like that, you just heard me say that. Now, think about what your response was. Okay, what doctors is the first response I've got? Okay, I mean, who are they talking to? Okay, was this from a study? I mean, they got a number here, 95%. It seems like an awful round number. It seems like, so did they actually study? And if they did do a study, let's suppose there is a study. Well, how is that study conducted? Did they say, okay, here's supplement A or supplement B? And then 95 of the doctors recommended supplement A versus supplement B. But there was only 2 choices. There could have been a choice C, no supplement. That would have been 90% of the doctors right there. Okay, now, when you talk about who funded the research, well, research projects that are funded by somebody who wants to reach a conclusion are usually structured in such a way that you have that A versus B, but you don't say it in your advertising. Okay, and also what biases are actually present. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time on biases, so don't really worry about that right now. So to get back from critical thinking, we've really got to talk about cognition. How do you think? So really, cognition and cognitive architecture studies how the mind processes information. Now, I teach human-computer interaction and designing interfaces, and the cognitive processes of designing a good computer interface are crucial. So, understanding your ability, cognitive abilities, and how cognition actually works will help you be a better critical thinker and also help you not make errors in judgment. So, let's look at the components of cognition. First one is attention. You can't focus on a lot of things at once. You may think you can, but you can't. Okay? Your mind naturally filters what you see and what you hear. Now, that is actually important because that kept us alive when we were out living in the jungle and a lion could leap out and get us. Okay? You need to have that ability for essentially focusing on something. It also helps your brain process better. The memory system, and if you've never, you might already know this because memory systems are pretty much understood and most people understand how they think. But there's really 2 memory systems that you do. You have your working memory. That's your temporary scratch pad. That's what you're using right now while you're listening to me. Some of the stuff that you hear as you're listening to me are going to be put into permanent storage. That's going to be there in the background. Some of it will not. You may take 20% of what I talked to you about today and throw it into long-term memory. You may take 0. You may take 50. You're not going to take 100 unless you've got just a perfect memory. And then understanding that memory is a reconstructive process. You don't have a video recorder in your head that plays back the video. What happens is pieces of information go from your working memory into your long-term memory, and they go into different places. And then your brain, when it reconstructs the memory, pulls all those little snippets and puts it back together and puts the memory back together in your brain. That's actually how it works. Now, people are very good at pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is also really what gives us this ability to do reconstructive memory. So you are able to recognize patterns, put together those connections, and we're very good at it. And then when we rebuild that memory, we can rebuild it based on patterns that we've actually put together. Now, is this good? Yes, because it allows us to remember and recall very quickly. Is it bad? Well, sometimes things don't actually follow a pattern and we put them into a pattern. Okay? But it does help us navigate systems that we're familiar with, and we can do it rapidly. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about the two different types of thinking. The last one being cognitive load. Okay? This is how much your brain can literally handle. It's easier to come up with a decision and work through a decision if you're not exhausted or tired or overloaded. And when that happens, we tend to run to shortcuts. And if you need to make a good decision, make it when you're not stressed or tired or overloaded. Now, there are situations where it's actually good to practice making decisions underneath stress or those specific situations. Me personally, being an adventure racer, I throw myself in highly stressful scenarios where I have to be able to navigate and make decisions, and I practice doing that because I know I'm going to be in situations where I have to do that. But that's basically training my brain to handle specific cognitive loads. Now, System 1 and System 2. This is really important it's important to understand how you make decisions and think. But it's also important to understand that this led to our survival. System 1 is quick. You just immediately make a snap judgment. If something jumps out of you, you react. You're not going through a critical thinking process very rapidly to figure out whether it's a threat or not a threat. Your brain is going to want to do that quickly. But again, it's a survival thing. When the tiger jumps out of you from the trees, you need to not sit there and debate what you're going to do. You need to just do it. Now, System 2 requires real effort. That is the complex scenario. So, for example, if I say 2 plus 2, you probably immediately came up with 4. And your System 1, because that pattern is built into your brain very, very heavily, your System 1 was able to actually do that very quickly. Okay? If I say 17 times 247, okay, now all of a sudden you have to engage System 2. And the first thing that you're going to think is, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to think through this. This is going to require effort. Because it does require effort. It is exercise. Your brain uses more blood while you're actually going through and trying to do these solutions. So, complex mental activities. But your ability to do System 2 is important because that is also part of critical thinking. So looking at System 1, the fast thinking, automatic, intuitive, little effort, often based on your emotions and things that you've got learned, quick, but it's also prone to errors. But if you're walking down the street and you see somebody and you recognize the face, System 1 just definitely jumps in. Okay, all little examples, you see why it's useful. Well, it is very, very useful, and you need it. It does have its own limitations. Okay, it is going to have cognitive biases. Okay, it's just natural because you don't have a way to actually go back and think, is this a bias? And oftentimes you jump to conclusions, and sometimes those conclusions are based on things that are completely irrelevant. What I do see is a lot of people have way too much overconfidence in their first impression. Oh yeah, the first impression is always right. No, it is not always right. And anybody who says that their first impression is always right is either bullshitting themselves or bullshitting you. One of the two, because it isn't. Good thought processes are better. Okay? And a lot of times people will turn back and say, yeah, that was my first impression, but damn, I was wrong. Okay, I call this the the dating app conundrum. And anybody who's talked to me on the side about this whole thing knows exactly what I'm talking about. Now, system 2, okay, that deliberate analytical thinking, the one thing about it is it does require mental effort. You want it to be logical and rule-based and uses evidence. Okay, now, some people aren't that great at logical thinking, but it is logical thinking as it is in their head. That's why learning how to do good logical thinking and critical thinking is important. You do need it. You do need to make, in everyday life, you make lots of decisions, and you need to be able to figure out, based on real good thinking, how to make those good decisions. One of the things that it's very useful for is the detection of deception. To know when somebody is, or something, or is pulling your leg. Because what happens is, a lot of times, especially in advertising, they target your system 1, and you've dropped back to the system 2 to actually realize. Now, if you implemented system 2 all the time, it would become extremely mentally exhausting. It does actually require a tremendous amount of effort. Now, here's a simple example of where you got system 1 and system 2. Your brain is either going to see a color or it's going to read a word, but to look at the other one. So if you were to say, what's the color behind each of these words? Most people are immediately going to read those words. That's something that because you read all the time. It's something that you do almost completely unconsciously. You're reading. Your system 1 thinking reads stuff when you see it. And that's important because when you see a stop sign, you want to sit back and go, that is a sign. It's red. It might indicate something. And the word stop, so it's probably indicating that I need to come to a stop. Or no, that isn't what your mind's doing. It's a stop. Okay. Now the red there actually does, that is a key in. But here, if you were to say, oh, what's the color of each of the words? Red, yellow, blue. When you're looking at these, you're thinking, well, you actually have to employ that system 2 to do that. Now, something that you do in everyday life. Now, the system 1 is going to look at somebody and they're going to make judgments based on how they look, that appearance. Now, that judgment may be right. It may be wrong. Okay? But system 2 is going to go back and say, let's put a little bit more into this. They look nice, but what I'm getting from the way that they're behaving and the character isn't matching up with what my system 1 told me. That's a good example. The online shopping, or any shopping whatsoever, okay, online shopping wants you to immediately use that system 1 thinking, and they make it easy for you to just click that button and bam, you've bought it. If you can avoid doing this, avoid it. Don't buy something until you give it some thought. Okay, what I do is as simple as I write down the things that I think that I need, and if I feel like I need to go buy something, I go back to my little list and go, well, it's not really on the list, or I really need it that bad. And if I do, maybe I can look at the different prices, or maybe I want to talk to somebody. And I was like this with my grandkids last night. There's a little ad for this AI-based panda bear that looks and moves like a real thing. Now, I could tell from the video that it was an AI video, and that the panda bear isn't going to have these actual smooth motions like a real panda bear. I don't know how much the thing cost, but they wanted that thing and they wanted it now. That was the system 1. There wasn't a chance I was going to buy it. Maybe they might get something like that for their birthday, but it will happen after I research everything about it and whether it actually works, and look at reviews and evaluate the reviews. That's system 2. Don't, because system 1 would have said, spend the money now and waste it. Now, good old metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. This is really good to understand your own thought processes and realize that you don't necessarily think exactly like everybody else does. But here's the thing. Metacognitive knowledge. This is one of the big things in metacognitive knowledge is understanding how you learn and understanding your strengths, your own strengths and weaknesses in metacognition. So this is a great example of myself. If somebody comes up and introduces themselves to me and says their name, it often flees from my brain within 30 to 45 seconds. I'm like, who the heck was that? If I write it down or they're wearing a name tag and I read it, I will remember it for days or possibly forever. I can still recall name tags that I've read years ago on people that I've never seen since. Okay, that means that that visual and that reading plants things in my brains better than that auditory. And I understand that. And I can use it to learn better. So if you understand your metacognition, how you think, you can be better at learning and remembering and doing things. Recognize your own metacognitive skills and understanding your metacognitive skills and using them in situations where you do want to learn things will make you a better learner. So there's some questions that you can ask yourself for metacognitive skills, and these can be developed. Do I understand this? Is there something to support my conclusion? What is the actual evidence? What biases do I have? One of the things I do, I know I am biased. I am biased. But I understand where my biases come from. I do. And I know what my biases are. Okay, I do. Now, to get past those biases, say, well, what are the people that are going to disagree with me? What are they going to say? I can almost always predict with certain people when I say something exactly what their responses are going to be, because I recognize what bias I put into what I said, and I recognize the biases that they have against it. So what it does do is it says, okay, you shouldn't have 100% confidence in pretty much anything. There's some things you might have, but understand where your confidence in different types of judgments come from. All right, so you can put this into action. Okay, studying for an exam is just a classic example. Now, certain types of things that you're learning might require certain types of understanding of your metacognitive processes and different approaches. Again, you're going to learn this from your own experience, from you doing it. Now, connecting the concepts. Do you know what System 1 thinking is? Do you know what System 2 thinking is? Do you know when you're using each of those? Are you aware of how you think? Do you know when you're engaging System 2 and System 1? And if you are using System 2, what critical thinking skills are you taking to the game? How do you have good critical thinking skills? So if you understand your ability to process, if you understand the processing that goes on, you can be better at thinking. And then this is one of the reasons why I'm giving this lecture is, I mean, I may be biased here, but I am considered a thought leader, somebody who's good at thinking things through to logical conclusions. I've been invited to many scenarios that I get paid to simply think, to come up with what my impression is based on my thought process, because I know how to employ System 2 thinking, and I also know how to take my System 1 responses and evaluate them in System 2. So, critical thinking is a skill you can learn. You can learn to do this. Okay, if you understand your cognitive architecture, how you think and how your thought processes work, you can be better at it. You definitely should understand when you're employing System 1 and System 2. If you want to take one thing out of what I just said and you want to put it into your long-term memory, It's System 1, System 2, and when you are personally employing each of these systems. You want to go one level further, understand your own metacognitive processes, how you personally think, and how you can use those ways that you think to improve your ability to think. And if you want to assess yourself, here you go. I'm actually going to read through these. I'm going to leave them up here because you can always free the slide, because this is just an example of all these self-assessments that you can do. This will be attached. There's an actual document attached to it. It has lots and lots of sources. So I'm hoping that this Module 1 was useful to you and that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And I'm Dr. Ron England signing out for this module.